Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I'm your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm really pleased to have back with me Chris Rossini. He's a libertarian columnist who writes for the Economic Policy Journal at economicpolicyjournal.com. He writes for the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. And, of course, we are well aware of that organization because Daniel McAdams is with us almost every week on this show. And he also writes for the Lions of Liberty, lionsofliberty.com. We had Chris on last week. Unfortunately, we just didn't have enough time to cover nearly as much material as I wanted to cover from his book called the Set Money Free, What Every American Needs to Know About the Federal Reserve. This is an excellent book in terms of, I think, helping your friends and people that are not as well versed on economics and the connection between the Federal Reserve and all kinds of economic problems that result from the Federal Reserve. And also, the Federal Reserve makes possible not only a destructive socialism in America, but I would say a destructive militarism overseas that kills people, really takes away the wealth of Americans through taxation, just does an awful lot of harm, and I think actually makes us less safe in the United States than we would have been if we just mind our own business and defended our own borders. So it's really important to understand the importance of the Federal Reserve, and I think what Chris's book, Set Money Free, is really provides a very basic understanding for anybody really to understand why the Federal Reserve is such a menace and why it has caused so many problems and why each of us are affected in a very major way by the Federal Reserve, the impoverishment of our country, the demise of the middle class. I think, the largest portion of our ills can be blamed directly on that institution. So, Chris, I'm really glad to have you back with me once again.
Thank you, Jay. I'm glad to be back.
We talked on the first hour of my show last week, we talked a little bit about Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman was a great champion of free markets and liberty, except when it came to money. He thought that he revered the Federal Reserve, apparently, and thought that the Federal Reserve was necessary, and we needed to have the Fed there to sort of control the money supply. But when it came to money, Milton Friedman wasn't a free market guy, was he?
No, unfortunately, he was not.
And so, it seems to me, I recall Milton Friedman at one point during the 1970s, Chris, before you were with us probably, because you're a lot younger than I am, but I was a young man during the 70s and saw the massive inflation that took place during that time. And Milton Friedman came out and really had a very important message at that time. He said that inflation that we're suffering from is simply caused by too much money. Money being created, excessive money creation. I think none of us Austrian thinkers would disagree with that, but somehow he thought that you needed to have a human entity, a human-guided entity called the Federal Reserve, to govern how much money should be created. Somehow he thought that all those smart guys from Princeton, Harvard, and Yale that sit around that big room at the Federal Reserve could figure out more efficiently and more wisely than the collective wisdom of millions of market participants. And then, at one point, though, he said we could just have money growing at 2% a year or something like that. We wouldn't even need to be actively involved with it. But then I recall, before he passed away, he was applauding Bernanke for dumping huge amounts of money into the system and keeping the system from imploding even worse. So I really don't know. Milton Friedman, to me, doesn't make any sense. He certainly wasn't consistent on the money supply issue. But let's just talk a little bit, Chris, if you would, about what are the economic results of the Fed. I mean, we printed tremendous amounts of money, or at least put tremendous amounts, trillions of dollars into the banking system after the Lehman Brothers failure. So where does that leave us now?
Okay, well, there are many bad ramifications every time the Federal Reserve prints money. Number one, and the one that hits us hard, is inflation and the loss of purchasing power of our money. So an easy way to think about it is, let's say you had a Mickey Mantle rookie baseball card and you cherish this thing because you believe that the exchange value would help someday pay for your kids' college education or a new car. and its rarity, you valued that. You knew that you'd be able to exchange this and get something very expensive or with it. And let's say one day you wake up and on the news you hear that another 10 million Mickey Mantle rookie cards have been unearthed. They were buried somewhere and nobody knew about it. Now immediately, without even thinking, without knowing economics or anything else, you would know in your mind, uh-oh, there goes the purchasing power of this card that I had. And the same thing applies to our money. We're born into this system, and we see these dollars, and everybody uses them, and we think that this is just how it is and how it's always been, and that's not the truth. But the same economic principle applies. When the Federal Reserve creates money and it primarily does it to finance government, it diminishes the exchange value of the money that's in our wallets. And that is one of the big ramifications, and we see it with price rises around us, even though the government will forever deny it. We see what things used to cost before versus what they cost now, and those products and services haven't changed over the decades, but the value of the money in our wallets has. And it's a very subtle way to steal from us. Mm-hmm. It's not a direct way, a direct taxation. It's a very hidden, it's almost like a pickpocket. And most people don't know, definitely most people don't even know that it's occurring until they start to see the prices rise around them. But the way that the system and the media is set up, there are other scapegoats that are automatically pointed to, and the Fed is totally ignored as the culprit of creating inflation.
Yeah. Yeah, it's incredible. I think you explained it very well. It's so simple when you explain it in those terms, Chris, that it is really a way of, it's not different than if there was a mafia don somewhere that had a printing press in his basement and he started printing enormous amounts of money and using it to buy things in a small community somewhere, and the prices would start to rise very dramatically as a result of that. And I think that I would like to ask you, the government is telling us that our inflation rate is 2% or less than that even. But my wife and I know that our cost of living is going up more than 2%. Have you got a sense of what the real cost of living might be for an average person?
I number one, never believe the government and their statistics. They control the money. They have a vested interest in making sure that at least the perception of no inflation exists. And if they control the money and the statistics that come out, I think you'd have to be very naive to believe them. So the best, benchmark that you can use is your own eyes and ears. Mm-hmm. And just as you pointed out, I'm in the same boat. I see costs rising steadily every single year, and you almost wish that it was 2%.
Right.
It's a lot more, but they have a good, control over the media and what is broadcast as that it's 2%. The Fed says it's 2%. The government, and if your eyes and ears are telling you otherwise, then you must have the problem. You're the crazy one. And they're going to do that until their dying day, or the dollar's dying day, with trying to convince us that inflation is just an illusion when it really isn't.
Mm-hmm. Chris, it's really interesting because inflation, of course, is just it's a construct, a human construct, something that then they, as you say, they can manipulate that, and they do all kinds of things that we talk about on the show. Substitution, hedonic pricing, gimmicks, and so forth. And what I think they never include, of course, the stock prices. The stock market is part of inflation, and we've seen new and record high stock prices, and that seems to me to be a redistribution of wealth from the people that created it. I like to say the miners, the manufacturers, the engineers, the farmers, people that really do things that create wealth. And it seems to me it's Washington. Whenever I go to Washington, I see enormous amounts of construction just continue going on and on and on for the government bureaucracy. And Wall Street, of course, keeps hitting new highs. So there is an inflation, but we don't think of that as inflation. A redistribution of wealth, I think, as you say, we're having our pockets picked. Those of us that are working for an honest living, and it really is a shame. It's, I think, a big part of the reason that the middle class is being destroyed. Would you agree with that?
I would say no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, we had it was very interesting last evening at a talk here in New York City. It was headed up by Gene Epstein. We saw this enormous increase in the disparity of wealth in the United States that took place, and it started to take place during the 1970s. And I suggested that one of the reasons why, like the top 1% or so were starting to become very wealthy and the middle class was being hollowed out, that was because we started a dishonest monetary system in 1971 when Nixon removed gold from our monetary system. Of course, we had the first part, Americans weren't allowed to own gold during FDR. But why do you think it is? Why is it that the powers that be decided we no longer needed to have gold behind the dollar or in support of the dollar?
The very short answer is because power and the lust for power has no bounds. And in order to have no bounds, wouldn't it be more convenient if you could finance it yourself? Mm-hmm. Wouldn't it be more convenient than having to directly go and tax the public? Let's just use yesterday's example of Obama just using airstrikes against Iraq once again. Did he come to each one of us and ask us to pay the bill? No, of course not. He doesn't have to.
No.
They have a building that prints up as much money as they need, and if they want to fight wars, they'll fight whatever wars they want, unless there's public resistance, and so far there's very little. Americans are very well kept in the dark about what goes on around the world. Mm-hmm. So they can finance whatever wars they want, and they have a military empire that is financed by the Fed. And at home, domestically, they can make whatever promises they want welfare-wise. And once again, they don't come to us with a tax bill where you're going to pay for this. They go and they dilute the money to pay for whatever programs they want. They, in essence, have created for themselves a system of unlimited power, unchecked by the fact that they can finance whatever they want. Now, economic laws are up against them. Economic reality is up against them. That's what brings every government empire down, is economic reality. But they can finance it without having to come and get the public's gold.
Mm-hmm. Well, indeed, it was certainly, I'm old enough to remember very vividly because I was a young man during Vietnam. And I remember when Nixon took us off the gold standard in 1971, and clearly the reason was, what was quite clear what the reason was. He didn't want to have to go to the American people and say that we had to pay for Vietnam, that we had to raise their taxes. He didn't want to go to the American people and say that Johnson's Great Society program, his socialism, had to be paid for, and we were going to have to raise taxes to pay for that. So the gold standard, the international gold standard at that time, got very much in his way, so he just said, well, we're the United States of America. We're going to default on our obligation to give an ounce of gold for every $35 that are sent back to America. And then that, if you look at the charts, you'll see tremendous amounts of money growth, and inflation then came in a big way in the 1970s, and I would argue continues to this day. But in the stock market and a lot of other, certainly we saw it in the housing market, all manner of problems that are caused and dislocations in the economy as a result of it. So maybe if we could just summarize this, on this issue, who benefits from the Fed and who is hurt by the Fed?
Okay, well, we could just go back to your example of the mafia boss having a printing press. Mm-hmm. One would guess that if that were the case, if he had a printing press in his house, he would soon make a lot of friends. There would be a lot of people lining up to get a hold of this hot new money that comes right off the press. And it should be no surprise to anyone that Washington, D.C. is buzzing, 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 because there's plenty of printing press money that gets handed out. So the obvious beneficiaries are those who receive the money first. Mm-hmm. they get to spend new money and drive up prices for everyone else that did not receive that money. So they're the ones in the driver's seat to benefit. Mm-hmm. And that's why Wall Street benefits. Wall Street gets the money first. They can make whatever loans, whatever crazy loans they want to quote unquote emerging markets and whatnot. And crony corporations, they're first to line up and to get this new money with big, huge government contracts. And so the first receivers of that money that first comes off the press benefit. Mm-hmm. Everyone else, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say then when these banks make these crazy loans and they default, then they get bailed out. So it's like it's like privatize the profits and socialize the losses, huh?
Exactly. Heads they win, tails they win.
Yeah,
exactly. There's no losing in their sense. And what an artificial world they've set up for themselves. If you think about it, it's so opposite of what real life is.
Yeah.
And to the people that are hurt the most, it's basically everyone else to varying degrees. Mm-hmm. The worst off are the poor and those who are on fixed incomes, mm-hmm. because they don't get any of the new money to spend and bid up prices. Mm-hmm. They instead sit back and watch prices rise.
Without their incomes going up.
Without their incomes going up, exactly. So the poor and and I would say everyone else, because we all lose from the inflation, from the loss of purchasing power, like we discussed earlier. And so the poor and the rest of us get to foot the bill.
Yeah, isn't that sweet? Now, one of the concepts you talked about in your book is moral hazard. Explain to us moral hazard and perhaps give us an example, or maybe we've already touched on it, but if you would like to just define the term moral hazard and then perhaps give an example.
Sure. That kind of refers to the Wall Street example we gave, but I'll give a good analogy that I thought of and I put into the book. Let's picture a gambler who has lost all his money in the casino, and he's penniless, but he goes out and goes to his wealthy grandmother, and she bails him out. She gives him another 10 grand, which he then takes to the casino and loses again, and he goes back, and he never really has to pay the consequence because his grandmother, his wealthy grandmother, is there to bail him out. Now, this is a little different than with the Federal Reserve, because the grandmother, it's her own property. If she wants to make bad economic decisions and lose her money, then that's for her to do. She hurts herself. Now, when the Federal Reserve gives money to Wall Street and they go and they gamble it, betting on all the various things that they bet on around the world, if something goes wrong, they go to the Federal Reserve and they get bailed out. We just saw it in 2008. We saw who is too big to fail, quote unquote. And but when the Federal Reserve does it, they don't just lose their own property. All right, maybe they're just not very bright and don't mind losing the money. They force all of us who have no say in the matter to foot the bill. And Wall Street has no incentive to make I mean, obviously they want to always make good bets, but if they lose, they get bailed out. Yeah. The Fed is their grandmother with all the money. And the Fed is financed by us and our hard work. When we go out and we expect to make $15, $20 an hour, we have to think twice because that money is being diluted. So we're getting, like we said earlier, we're getting pickpocketed without even knowing it.
Yeah, the moral hazard. I mean, it really is true that these banks, and if you're talking about the banks that are too big to fail, and I think it was just yesterday Sheila Bair was talking about, or I read something in the Financial Times about how she says basically nothing has changed, and we really, if anything, have just with all of the QE, quantitative easing that's going into the system, have actually increased the problem, not decreased it. So it continues on. You know, in section, I think it was section 12 of your book, you state the Fed is the main obstacle to a real recovery. That, of course, is very contrary to everything we hear on the mainstream media. So, can you explain why the Fed's actions are really detrimental to the economic recovery?
Sure. Well, we're now getting used to going through one boom and bust after another. And the source, contrary to what you'll find on television, is not greedy businessmen and lack of government regulation, as if this country has some kind of lack of government. Government is everywhere.
Yeah.
The source of the boom and bust cycle that we are now experiencing more and more frequently is the Federal Reserve. With their money printing and financing of government, they artificially push down interest rates. Now, interest rates are a price, and prices are supposed to give us an accurate description of supply and demand, what is demanded most, what is in large supply, what is not demanded, what needs to be closed down and moved to better, more efficient hands. Mm-hmm. So the government messes with prices and creates an artificial situation. When they do so, when they push down interest rates artificially, people who should not be taking out loans end up taking out loans. Homes that should not be built are built. Stock prices and companies with no earnings, no revenue, just because they have a .com are financed when they should not be financed. In a normal market economy with higher market rates, these bad economic decisions would not occur. So what in essence happens is a boom, which is considered the good times, and what people yearn for is actually the bad times. It's when destruction is happening. It's when resources are diverted to areas that they should not be diverted. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, the Fed is forced to raise interest rates because they fear inflation, and the bust commences. And that is when the bust is actually when reality kicks in, when all the bad investments that should never have been made have to be liquidated, when all the bad companies, or not bad companies, but all the companies that economically should not have been started, should not have been financed, they have to be liquidated. It's a sad part of this process that the Fed has created, but in order to have a normal economy, they have to be liquidated. The Fed will fight, and the Fed, the government, the public will fight tooth and nail to avoid this liquidation process that must occur. And so they once again drive down interest rates and create even more artificial distortions in our economy. Ultimately, something has to give, and because central planning never trumps the market always trumps central planning. But the Fed never wants to, and government and politicians, they always want to recreate an artificial boom, and that's why they always look to whoever it is, Bernanke and Yellen, to act as some kind of savior when it's a literal impossibility. They could only create another artificial, non-sustainable situation.
Mm-hmm. And they have to do an artificial stimulation, artificial economy, probably because a lot of the things that they desire to do would not otherwise be desired by a free market economy. So, like let's take, for example, the reasons that Nixon took us off the gold standard in 1971, because he wanted to have a war, or somebody wanted to have a war, and they wanted to have socialism to buy votes. But if it was left up to the people to pay for those things, they wouldn't have done it. So you have this propaganda that's going on telling us, though, the mainstream media is telling us that the policies are exactly right, and they're completely opposite of what you're telling us, Chris. I am in agreement with you, of course, that we see the malinvestment that you just talked about. You talked about malinvestment in the IT industry in 2000. We saw it in the housing industry after that. I'm going back further in time. I remember because I was working at NMB Bank in New York, and it really struck me because the lights really started going on when they talked about NAFTA. And Ross Perot talked about that giant sucking sound of jobs leaving America and going to Mexico and elsewhere. Well, the bank that I was working for, NMB, along with Citibank, were the two biggest lenders to Mexico. And I realized as I was talking to my colleagues, the only people there there was nobody there that would have entertained any of the arguments that Perot was making. If you were a Democrat, that was okay. If you were a Republican, that was okay. But if you dared to think that maybe there was some virtue to the notion of what Ross Perot was talking about, then you were not cool. You weren't part of the club. But then we saw what happened, because Mexico was a very dangerous place to lend to. The rates that Citicorp and NMB got were extremely high. But then Mexico defaulted, and what happened? The taxpayers bailed them out again. A misallocation of resources and capital into Mexico, not because Mexico didn't deserve it, but because, clearly there were issues that kept the price higher. And these guys benefited from those by making high-risk loans that they otherwise wouldn't have made if they knew they wouldn't ultimately be bailed out. So I think that, the Fed is responsible for this stuff, but a dishonest monetary system is really at the heart of it as well. Yes. The question then, Chris, is you and I understand this. The Austrians understand this. People that listen to this show understand it. I think there's a growing number of people that understand the ills of the Fed, thanks to a very great extent to Ron Paul and yourself and other people that are helping people to understand this. But how can we return to a free market economy?
Well,
free market money, really.
Yeah, free market money. I do not have a roadmap in front of me that says here's 1, 2, 3, 4. I do know one thing. It's that the minds of the American public have to be changed drastically. The belief in government ruling not only this country but the entire world has to change drastically. The belief that you have to rely on the government, and we know the numbers now that there are more people on the federal dole than there are working, has to change drastically. So my book, your work, my work is to help change minds first. Because
yes.
If we implement free market money just at the drop of a hat, and minds have not been changed, they're just going to yearn for another tyrant. Mm-hmm. So that's number one. I definitely support the direction that Ron Paul has been preaching for many years, and that's to allow the competition in money. Mm-hmm. Right now, there is a complete monopoly over the U.S. dollar, and we are all compelled to use it by law. They're called legal tender laws. Legal tender laws should be abolished, and people should be free to use whatever money they wish. Traditionally, and over thousands of years, gold and silver won the game as the most popular forms of money. Whether that happens again is let the market decide.
Yeah.
I believe that it would. But if not, and if the market decides on another form of money, then so be it. Mm-hmm. We should not be forced to use a money that they're going to create into infinity. So, and another step that could be taken is to remove capital gains taxes on gold and silver. There should be absolutely no capital gains taxes. If people want to use them as money, and then that should be the case. After that, the way that freedom works is you can't predict it. How things would unfold, you really can't predict, and that's the beauty of freedom. It's a spontaneous order. So, but there are major steps. One in first educating ourselves and understanding the problem with the monetary system, and to advocate as much freedom in money as we possibly can.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree that it's a bottoms-up approach. It has to be, the population has to understand why it's in their best interest, to have an honest money, a market-driven monetary system. And until people understand that, I think it's going to be very difficult. As you say, people just yearn for another tyrant. Here's a question that really bothers me a lot, Chris. An idea about ending the Fed and getting rid of and letting the market decide the free monetary system. Our government was founded to be a republic. It wasn't meant to be an empire. But I'm sure you'd agree that we're more of an empire than a republic now, would you not?
Oh, absolutely.
So if that's the case, now here's the issue. As you and I are talking, the United States is getting involved in wars. We're dropping bombs all over the place. So we're covertly going into countries, getting rid of popularly elected governments in some cases. Some cases they're dictators that we put into power one way or another previously. But almost everywhere you go, the United States is involved militarily, forcibly putting people in power, sending money that is, again, created out of nothing, to bribe people, to buy people off, to dispose of leaders and so forth and so on, and of bombs and all kinds. I mean, the issue is this, this is a huge military-industrial complex. We talked about the spreading monstrosity of Washington, D.C. and the government. Now, if we were to go to some sort of a free market monetary system, and all of this infrastructure that has funded and made possible this enormous, I think very evil system that we have in place around the world, wouldn't there be hell to be paid if we suddenly pulled it away?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's you would want to pay the hell, if you're talking about just the average person, as soon as possible.
Yeah.
If you go and to a bar or to a nightclub and get drunk, beyond just blitzed out of your mind, and then say, but I really do not want a hangover. Well, I'm sorry, but you did it. Mm-hmm. So now that's basically what they have done, but to keep it in these terms, they'll keep drinking and drinking and drinking until they kill themselves.
Right.
So you would want to get off of this as the sooner the better. If it was today and we could immediately put an end to it, the better the after effect will be, the hangover for us, than if we wait another year or 10 years. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, it looks like we're going to have to wait until it's inevitable. But yeah, it's not going to be pretty, but at least economically and morally and mentally and in every aspect of our lives, things would at least get on the proper path, you would hope, afterwards.
Yeah, as you talk about that analogy of getting bombed out of your mind and then not wanting to have a hangover, I have to think of a song from Johnny Cash, and he talked about having another, like a six-pack for breakfast or something when he came home from the night before to keep the pain away. And that seems to be what we're doing with trillions of dollars that are being created out of nothing to try to keep the system afloat, the banking system from imploding. That seems to be what we're doing. And again, Chris, unless people understand what you and I are talking about here, unless they understand the cause of the problem, then we're never going to come to a proper solution. As you say, they'll just yearn for another tyrant. That's the bad news. The good news, though, is that there is an awful lot of traction. A lot of young people are hearing the message that Ron Paul has put out there, and people like you that work with Ron, Daniel McAdams, the Mises Institute. There's lots of people that do understand, and so we have to keep trying. Now, in section I think it was 14 of your book, chapter 14, you said the ideas that is titled "The Ideas That Must Dominate." You said that do you have you raised the question: do you have to be famous like Ron Paul or make a spectacle of yourself to affect change? And I thought that you had a good perspective of that. Would you care to share that with our listeners?
Sure. Well, number one, there's only one Ron Paul, and chances of another Ron Paul are slim to none, because the government, they were taken once. They will not allow another Ron Paul to ever come again.
Too many serious questions asked because people were demanding them. End the Fed. Audit the Fed, all that stuff. I'm sure they're trying to put behind them as fast as possible, right?
Absolutely. So the fact that Ron Paul was able to use the political platform against the government itself was almost a miracle in itself. But that's the way it worked, and we're very fortunate. He reached the masses. That's not in our hyper-connected world with Facebook and Twitter and radio shows and YouTubes. You don't need to be a Ron Paul. Just talking to your neighbors, your family, your friends, passing them a link to Jay's show, it works wonders when a critical mass of people do it. We don't all have to be famous. We don't all have to reach the heights that Ron Paul did. But and one thing I do want to point out is there's no central plan to this. There's no huge organization of one person, even Ron Paul himself, that pulls the levers and says, sure, this has to happen. This is where you fit into the... Mm-hmm. We're all creative individuals and can each find our own way. to spread the message privately, just meeting, just convincing one mind here, one mind there. Most people will not want to be convinced. They'll argue the opposite. And my philosophy is just to let them go. It's not important to convince everyone.
Yep.
It's just important to convince enough. And that number, what equals enough, is unknown to us. But as long as we're doing our part, perhaps enough, a critical mass of people will be reached and things will change.
Yeah, for sure. I think you shake the dust off your shoes and you move on to someone else that's receptive to it. And probably, one of the reasons as I think about Ron Paul's success, one of the reasons that he was so successful is because he was so genuine and he believed it. And he was not combative. He was not a person and is not a person who will, start to have arguments with people. Basically, he lays out the facts and he says them sincerely. And he's respectful of people that don't agree with him, and he works with people that have differences of opinions on other issues, but on the banking issue or foreign affairs or whatever. So Chris, you said there's only one Ron Paul, but the other side of that is there's only one Chris Rossini. There's only one Jay Taylor. There's only one of each of us, and we have to touch the people that we know and come in contact with every day. And I think if we're living our lives in a way that brings respect and believability, credibility, then I think we can make a difference in our own way. Wherever our paths take us. I know that many times my wife says, "Well, Jay, you're talking about all this stuff, but what can I do?" And I said, "Well, what you can do, dear, is just explain to your friends, the people you're in touch with every day. Just talk to them about it." Let them know. And then those people, if they become convinced, can touch the lives of many more people. So it can really sort of mushroom out into a large number of people that are affected ultimately. But it has to start somewhere. And I think most of all, Chris, we have to know what we believe and then follow those beliefs and think through things too, as I know that you have. And is there anything else you'd like to share? I mean, there's so much in your book, and let's tell people that Set Money Free, what every American needs to know about the Federal Reserve. You can go to my website at jtaylormedia.com, click on the banner, it will take you to wherever you can buy the book. I guess probably Amazon.
Yes, it's on Amazon, paperback, Kindle, and also at barnesandnoble.com as well. And
this is a good book to do exactly what I was just suggesting. You do is, first of all, educate yourself, and then, as Ron Paul said, he said, just read this quote, and I read it the other day on the first hour of my show, but this is, Ron Paul said, "Set Money Free is an important work that explains the economic, philosophical, and historical case against the Fed. People looking to spread the ideas of liberty should consider buying multiple copies of this book to hand out to friends, relatives, and co-workers to show them why ending the Fed is key to restoring liberty, peace, and prosperity." End of quote. Ron Paul made that statement in a glowing endorsement of this book, by the way. He said that on June 11th of this year. So I think this book, Chris, and thank you so much for writing it, and I think it lays it out in very simplistic but well-organized terms. It explains why we need to get rid of the Fed, why we need to have honest money, and I want to thank you very much for this work. I think it's really very, very good, and I know you didn't write it to get rich. I hope you do, but I think you wrote it mostly because this is something you believe very firmly in, and you want other people to understand the importance of it. I think you did it as a good American, as a patriotic American, actually, for sure, Chris. So I want to thank you very much. Anything else you'd like to add before we conclude our discussion today?
There is one little thing that's very related. I know you have Daniel McAdams on.
Yes.
He's my colleague at the Ron Paul Institute.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've decided to donate 10% of every sale of this book to the Ron Paul Institute because I believe so strongly in the Ron Paul Institute and specifically Daniel himself. I think he's one of the finest foreign policy minds in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so by buying the book, not only can you learn about the Federal Reserve, but you could also make a donation to a very important institute.
I couldn't agree with you more, Chris. I think that's extremely important. I know how hard Daniel works, and he works very closely with Ron Paul, sees him almost every day. I know that Daniel really runs that organization on a shoestring, and if he had more money, he definitely could do an awful lot more to help people understand. And by the way, one thing we didn't talk about in our discussion, maybe we can do it some other time, is I guess we touched on it, is certainly the ability of the military-industrial complex to do the things it's doing that I think actually make America less safe, not more safe, because the blowback issue is definitely in play now. I think we're seeing it around the world. I think we saw it on 9/11. And so, if it's in a way, ending the Fed would help make us more safe, I believe. And pulling back the empire and allowing Americans to be free would make us more safe, not less safe. So I thank you very much, Chris, for coming on the show and talking about Set Money Free. I think it's an excellent work, and I would really suggest to our listeners that you buy not one but several copies of Set Money Free and then share them with your friends. Thank you very much, Chris, for being with us. I look forward to talking to you again in the not too distant future.
Thank you so much, Jay.